question has kind of arisen. Is Dak Prescott worthy of being within this conversation about potential MVPs? Now, of course, the MVP, as Blake, you mentioned in Crosstalk when we were talking with the G-Bag Nation, the MVP is a full season award, and we're only in week 10, or we're now headed towards week 11. Mm-hmm. So there's still things to be seen. Through. However, we know how this goes. We begin to have the conversation and start setting up what the framework is. Does Dak Prescott deserve to be within this space? And before you answer, are you interested in what Micah Parsons had to say just last week on his The Edge podcast? He was ahead of us all, or maybe not us all, but he was ahead of us in this regard in trying to have this conversation. Cut 16.
I think that Dak Prescott should be in the MVP conversation. If you're looking at numbers, what he's able to do, his efficiency, Dak Prescott is playing at elite level. He needs to be talked about more, not less. We should open our eyes. Open your eyes, people. Dak Prescott should be in the MVP conversation, and I think he will prove that leading out to the end of this year and winning some big games and leading us to the playoffs.
So what say you, Blake? Like, where are you on this in this perspective of, does Dak Prescott need to be involved in this conversation?
I think it's safe to say, based on how he has played the last 4 weeks since they lost to the Niners, he deserves to be in the conversation. But I think the only reason it's such is the teams we're playing. I know we played the Eagles, but all the teams that we've beaten in the last couple of weeks or played against, none of them have had amazing defenses. So he has played well. You can't choose your opponents. You just play who's in front of you. And I think Dak has exceeded expectations from last year. I think, like you said earlier, CA, last year was a little bit of an anomaly with the turnovers. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's that kind of player. He's top 10 in turnover to interception rate. I think he's still one of those guys you can rely on, and he's played a lot better this season. To throw out some numbers, Dak is third in the league in QB rating. He's third in the league in big play passes with 38, and those are plays over 20 air yards. Both Dak and C.J. Stroud are top 2 in 20-yard plus completion. So he's playing well. It's just, I don't know. When you don't have a win against a team that's over 500, when the teams you've beaten are a combined 15 and 32, it's hard for me to give him MVP. I think he's the Cowboy MVP, but league MVP, I'm not seeing it.
Who was the MVP last year?
Who was the MVP?
877-881-1053, thetruckwreck.com text line. See, that goes to my point. It's almost one of those things that, because there's always a conversation every year, and there's a lot of guys who are supposed to get it that wind up not getting it.
Patrick Mahomes?
Yeah, Patrick Mahomes. Last year, starting the season, it's supposed to be Josh Allen. Mm-hmm. And then around in November and December, wait a minute, it's going to be Jalen Hurts. And then Jalen Hurts got hurt. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't him. And so Patrick Mahomes, because he wound up going all the way to the Super Bowl, the whole 9 yards, he was that guy. Dak's always going to have a stretch where he has extremely good play. And people act like, he's never done this before. When he was a rookie, he won 11 games in a row, was Offensive Rookie of the Year. Only had 4 picks that season.
13-3.
But there are people saying, wait a minute, that ain't really his award. That was Zeke's award. Zeke led the NFL in rushing that year. It was really Zeke. I'm going to say this right now, because Dak Prescott does not have insane arm talent. He's going to have the stats. And this is a regular season award. He's going to have the stats sometimes. He's going to have a great defense, great offense, or whatever. Wide receivers, CeeDee Lamb showing out, right? They're never going to give him his credit because he doesn't have the insane arm talent. They're going to say, he won a Super Bowl. Dak didn't win a Super Bowl. That defense, anybody win a Super Bowl with Micah Parsons. That's what they were. The haters are going to always hate on him. So being in the conversation and playing for the Dallas Cowboys, because it doesn't count if you win the Super Bowl, they're going to give it to the regular season guy. And at the end of the year, he might have all the stats, but they're not going to give it to him because they're going to say, well, he hadn't won any playoff games yet. He's in a conundrum.
Well, and one thing that we also need to realize and recognize is that this is very much a narrative award, right?
It's
that having
subjective.
that MVP award, that MVP moment. And then also this ends up being in some ways still team related. You have to have a team with a certain level of success.
Yep.
And so that can cut one of two ways. Blake, you've mentioned, and rightfully so, the ways that the two teams that I think you talk about that were big time competitions, particularly big time measuring sticks for them on what their ultimate goal is, which is making noise in the playoffs, going deep into the playoffs, and hopefully going to the Super Bowl. those have been L's. One of those a really bad one, but one of them a competitive one, but still a loss against the Philadelphia Eagles. There's not a lot of those games that remain on your schedule where you talk about maybe the Seahawks, depending on how you view them. Obviously, the Eagles once more when you get them at home. And then how do you feel about the Dolphins? How do you feel about the Lions? The Lions probably one of those. Those are the remaining games that you have as to have an opportunity at those. But you still have a schedule that allows you to get up a lot more stats. And the big thing is if this can be consistent. Because as you mentioned, CA, Dak Prescott has had high levels of play for relatively short periods. I'm not trying to dismiss a month or a couple of months worth of good play. Those things are worth praising. When we talk about MVP, this gets to a tough place, particularly when we talk about the talents and the narratives that are built around them. And allow me to go to Bet Online and give you some kind of odds, or at least I'm not going to throw all the odds at you, but I'm going to give you kind of the ranking on who has the best odds. Currently, as of right now, the best odds to win regular season MVP goes to Jalen Hurts, then Patrick Mahomes, then Lamar Jackson, then Tua Tagovailoa. Right? Like, what are we looking at when we talk about these teams? Teams that have won a lot of games, teams that kind of we've heard their names kind of come up a lot in narrative. And, of course, Dak Prescott is going to be involved there, but then C.J. Stroud is ahead of him. Joe Burrow is ahead of him. Brock Purdy's ahead of him. Christian McCaffrey's ahead of him. Jared Goff is ahead of him, and Dak Prescott. And then that's when Dak Prescott comes in. And while I think that is kind of reckless, and maybe some of that also would be, in a way, trying to counterbalance the amount of money that would come in on a Dak Prescott being the quarterback of the most popular team in the NFL. I think also there's still something to be said for the ways in which some of these other players have more narrative ahead of, or in front of them. But you can't ignore the fact that he's ranked number one in quarterbacks when it comes to completion rate, the ways in which he's tied with 4 quarterbacks for third most touchdowns at 17. And those things, he has more opportunity to continue to get better as we've seen this offense, as we were talking about earlier, progress and get better and seem to play into more of his strengths. You imagine that if those things continue, he has a good opportunity, but it has to be wins and it has to be against those big teams.
See, I think some of those guys that you named, I think that's where the argument comes that he's doing better than a lot of those guys you named towards the latter half. But the Lamars of the world, the Patrick Mahomes, the Jalen Hurts, they might not have stat for stat better in the last 3-4 weeks, but their team is winning. They're in a better position. They've been more consistent. They haven't had peaks and valleys, and I feel like that's what you have with the Cowboys. You have peaks and valleys. You have a game where you win 49-0 or 40-10, and then you play a primetime game, and which one sticks longer? When you beat the Rams 40-10, 40-0, or when you lose to the 49ers on primetime and get dog walked?
Did you just call the Cowboys the Miami Dolphins?
That's what a lot of people are saying.
I see the comparisons.
100%. Yeah, I mean, you could look at our truckwreck.com text line right now and you see folks that are saying beat quality opponents. It's been something that's been a frustration in Cowboys Nation right now.
And like you said, narratives play a big part. Just winning games doesn't do it enough for the MVP conversation. You got to win those standalone games when everybody's watching, money's on the line. Hey, what are you going to do when the bright lights are on? And Dak hasn't performed. I won't say Dak hasn't performed. Dak hasn't been MVP level when those bright lights are there. He's been very good, and I think the Cowboys will go into the playoffs with a deep run. But you got to be putting your team in that number one spot every week to be the MVP.
And not only that, in those big games like the 49ers game, if it's one thing if the Cowboys were to win that game, he would have had to dominate that game. In other words, he'd have to carry his team for everybody to say, wow, Dak Prescott's having a hell of a year, because all eyeballs would be on the big name opponent that the Cowboys beat. But he was the one that dominated them. In other words, the Giants game had to be what he just did against the Giants. He would have had to done that against the 49ers to get the respect with a K on it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely those big platform moments. It's almost like what we talk about in college football. Is that Heisman moment. You need some of those in front of everybody. You're absolutely correct in that. And am I wrong in thinking that sometimes there is a heightened level of play that's expected of the Cowboys quarterback as well? Is that this is maybe a little bit unfair in that regard? Not trying to say that, look, he's played well, and not trying to also say that he's been easily the best player in the league all the way across, but it does feel like there also is a heightened expectation of playing for the Cowboys. You also needed to do this at a certain level higher than maybe some of the other guys are doing it. I don't think that right now he is squarely within the within that situation of MVP conversation, but I think he's adjacent, and I think it becomes It needs to be a continued stretch of this. It needs to be undeniable, and it needs to happen on a big platform.
That part about being a Cowboys quarterback, let me explain for you.
Yes, please.
I'm going to put it into words for everybody to understand.
Talk to me.
Cowboys are the team that a lot of people love to hate. You follow what I'm saying? So the haters are never going to give him credit.
Oh,
right?
never.
But the ones who actually like him are not comparing him to the Patrick Mahomes and the Joe Burrow. They're comparing him to Romo,
The
Troy
greats.
Aikman, Roger Staubach. In other words, guys who are in the Hall of Fame outside of Romo. They're comparing him to those arms. So it's like he's getting compared to different kind of categories in order to just to be the MVP, let alone conversation. What do you mean conversation? He's not top 5. That's what the haters say.
And I think that's probably the situation, is being within that kind of 3 to 5 range when we talk about in that MVP conversation. But yeah, man, I think we're all in this place where he's on the outside looking in, but we're all still looking for that opportunity of playing really well on the big stage, and because I personally believe that he was playing incredibly against the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yes.
But the tough thing about him is that he has to wear around his neck the way that game ended.
Yep.
And no matter where you want to place that blame, if you want to talk about play calling, if you want to talk about execution, he's going to wear that because of the quarterback's wins nature of our conversations. And so it's not just going to have to be the incredible play. You have to have those moments. You have to have those closeout situations that I think will put him squarely in that place where people feel better about saying that.
These next couple games, he can definitely improve his MVP conversation. He went playing against the Bills, playing against the Eagles, playing against the Dolphins. If he continues to play that he's playing with,
real quick, I do want to let you know the next couple of games is Panthers
Easy.
next week, and then Thanksgiving versus the Commandos.
Easy.
And so those aren't going to speak to what you're talking about.
If he does what he's doing against them and it continues for the rest of the season, I think this pace more so is what I'm saying, then yeah, he'll be in the conversation. But if he falters at all, if he loses any of those big primetime games, the haters are going to be coming out the woodworks. They've been calling for his job, trust me, let alone MVP.
Can I give you a thought-provoking question?
Please do.
Is Dak Prescott better than Eli Manning? And we know Eli's got 2 rings, but there are people who say that was the defense. I'm just asking the question. After the body of work, he's age 30, 7 years. I'm not talking about what he has done. I'm just talking about, is he a better quarterback than Eli Manning, talent-wise?
We'll leave you to think about that.
877-881-1053.
Again, we seem to be in agreement that not quite yet, but he's trending in a great direction. And if this is sustained, that'd be huge in leading towards that, because it feels like he can be, but we've been in this place before. And I think some of that is there. There's the okie doke factor, which I think a lot of Cowboys fans have gotten to, where it's like, let me get to the end and see what it is at the end, and then I'll believe, because it feels like you've had that yo-yo a lot.